I was a terrible student in high school, and the thing that the auto accident did, and it happened just as I graduated, so I was at this sort of crossroads, but it made me apply myself more because I realized more than anything else what a thin thread we hang on in life, and I really wanted to make something out of my life, and I was in an accident that, in theory, no one could survive. So it was like, well, I'm here, and every day now is an extra day. I've been given an extra day. So I got to make the most of it. And then the next day is I've been given 2 extra days. And I've sort of, you can't help in that situation but get into a mindset like that, which is you've been given this gift, and every single day is a gift. And I wanted to make the most of it. Before, when I was in high school, I just sort of wandered around, and I wanted to be a car mechanic, and I wanted to race cars, and I just, the idea of trying to make something out of my life, wasn't really a priority. But I really, what the accident was, allowed me to apply myself at school. I got great grades. Eventually, I got very excited about anthropology and about social sciences and psychology, and I was able to push my photography even further, and eventually discovered film. And in film schools, I decided to go to film school because I loved the idea of making films. I love photography, and everybody said it was a crazy thing to do because in those days nobody made it into the film business. I mean, just unless you were related to somebody, there was no way in. So everything was silly. You're never going to get a job. But I wasn't moved by that. I set the goal of getting through film school, and just then focused on getting to that level, because I didn't know where I was going to go after that. I wanted to make documentary films, and eventually I got into the goal of, once I got to school, of making a film. One of the most telling things about film schools, you got a lot of students in those days, especially, it's not quite so much today, but wandering around saying, "Oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish I could make a movie. I can't get in this class. I can't get any." First class I had was an animation class. It wasn't a production class. I had a history class and an animation class. And in the animation class, they gave us 1 minute of film to put onto the animation camera, to operate it, to see how you could move left, move right, make it go up and down. And it was a test to see, and then the teacher you had certain requirements that you had to do. You had to make it go up and make it go down. And then the teacher would look at it and say, "Oh, yes, you maneuvered this machine to do these things." And I took that 1 minute of film and made it into a movie. And it was a movie that won 20 or 25 awards, in every film festival in the world, and kind of changed the whole animation department. And meanwhile, all the other guys were going around saying, "Oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish I was in a production class." And so then I got into another class, and it wasn't really a production class, but I managed to get some film, and I made a movie. And I made lots of movies while I was in school, while everybody else was running around saying, "Oh, I wish I could make a movie. I wish they'd give me some." Was always extremely curious about why people did the things they do, and I was always very interested in what motivates people, and telling stories and building things. I've always been very, very into building things, whether they're chess sets or houses or cars or whatever. And I like to put things together. And so when I was young, from at least my teenage years, they were completely devoted to cars, and that was the most important thing in my life, from about ages of 14 to 20. Everybody has talent, and it's just a matter of moving around until you've discovered what it is. A talent is a combination of something you love a great deal, that's something you can lose yourself in, something that you start at 9 o'clock, look up from your work, and it's 10 o'clock at night. And also something that you have a talent, not a talent for, but skills that you have a natural ability to do very well. And usually those two things go together. Learning to make films is very easy. Learning what to make films about is very hard. And what you really got to do is focus on learning as much about life and about the various aspects of it first, and then learn just the techniques of making a movie, because that stuff you can pick up pretty quickly. but having a really good understanding of history, literature, psychology, sciences are very, very important to actually being able to make movies. No matter how easy it looks on the outside, it is a very, very difficult struggle. Most people, you don't see the struggle part of a person's life, you only see the success they have. But I haven't met anybody here at the Academy or anywhere else that hasn't been able to describe years and years and years of very, very difficult struggle through the whole process of achieving anything whatsoever. So, and there's no way to sort of get around that. And the secret is just not to give up hope. And it's very hard not to, because if you're really doing something worthwhile, I think you will be pushed to the brink of hopelessness before you come through the other side. And you somehow have to hang in through that. I've had much more down in my life than I've had up, and much more struggle. I started first of all, when I went into film school, everybody said, what are you doing? It's kind of a complete dead end for a career, because nobody has ever made it from a film school into the actual film industry. Just, maybe you go to work for Lockheed or some industrial company to do industrial films, but nobody actually made it into the entertainment business. I had no interest in going into the entertainment business, so I didn't really care. I was more interested in just doing films, going back to San Francisco, doing experimental films and that sort of thing, and maybe making documentaries and that sort of thing. So I didn't care. Then I finished school. I went to San Francisco, and everybody said, "Why are you going to San Francisco?" I said, "That's where I live." And they said, "You can't possibly work in the film business living in San Francisco." And I said, "Well, I want to live where I want to live, and I will make films because I love to make films." My first 6 years in the business was, hopeless. And there's a lot of times when you sit and you say, "Why am I doing this? I'll never make it." It's not going to happen. It's just, I should really go out and get a real job and try to survive. And, because I borrowed money from my parents, I borrowed money from my friends. I was sort of, it didn't look like I was ever going to actually be able to pay anybody back, which is a part of living. You do have to eat, pay your rent, and pay back your friends who are supporting you. It took me years to get my first film off the ground, and as I talk to film students now, especially, I say the easiest job you'll ever get is to try to make your first film, because that's the easy one to get, is the first film, because nobody knows whether you can make a film or not. You've made a bunch of little projects, you've shown off you have talent, and you talk real fast, and you convince somebody that you should be doing a feature, and they let you do a feature. After you've done that feature, then you really have a heck of a difficult time getting your second film off the ground, because then they look at your first film and they go, "Oh, well, we don't want you." I came from a very avant-garde documentary kind of filmmaking world. I like cinema verite documentaries, and I like non-story, non-character tone poems that were being done in San Francisco at that time, and that's the filmmaking that I was interested in. Francis Coppola, who was my mentor, he's a writer and works with actors, stage director, and I said, "You got to learn how to do this." And so I took him up on the challenge, wrote my own screenplays, learned to write. It took me and work 3-4 years to get from my first film to my second film, of banging on doors, trying to get people to give me a chance, writing, struggling with no money in the bank, working as an editor on the side, working as a cameraman on the side, getting little jobs, eking out a living, trying to stay alive, and pushing a script. American Graffiti, I was still struggling with my "I don't want to be a writer" syndrome, and I had some good friends of mine that I wanted to write the screenplay, but it took me like 2 years just to get the money to do a screenplay, and I got a little tiny amount of money, and which I had to go to the Cannes Film Festival to get on my own. And so finally I got this money. I called back and I said, I got the money, we can start working on the screenplay. And they said, "Oh, we don't want to do that now. We got our own low budget picture off the ground, and we can't write it." And I said, "Oh, no." And I said, what am I going to do? I'm in Europe, and I'm not going to be back for like 3 months, and I want to get this thing off the ground. So they recommended another student from school that I knew pretty well. And I had a story treatment that laid out the entire story scene by scene. And so I called him up on the phone from London, and I said, do you want to do this? And he said, okay. And the person I was working with at that time as a producer made a deal with him for the whole money, because there wasn't very much. It was so tiny that he could only get him to do it for the whole amount of money. When I came back from England, the screenplay was a completely different screenplay from the story treatment. It was more like Hot Rods to Hell. It was very fantasy-like, with playing chicken and things that kids didn't really do. And I wanted something that was more like the way I grew up. So I took that and I said, okay, now here I am. I've got a deal to turn in a screenplay. I got a screenplay that's just not the kind of screenplay I want at all. And I have no money. And I spent the very last money I had saved up to go to Europe to make the deal. So I had nothing. And that was a very dark period for me. So I sat down myself and wrote the screenplay. I kept getting phone calls from producers saying, I hear you're great. I'd made a film called THX, which had no story and no character, really. It was kind of an avant-garde film. And so I had all these producers calling me saying, I hear you're really good at material that doesn't have story. I've got a record album I want you to make into a movie. Or things like that. And they were offering me a lot of money. But they were terrible projects. And so I had to constantly turn down vast sums of money while I was starving, writing a screenplay for free that I didn't like to write because I hated writing. But I did finish it, and I did write the screenplay, and eventually I got a deal to make the movie. And then after I finally got that, then my friends came back in and did a rewrite on it. But it was a very dark period, and I could have very easily just taken the money and gone off and done one of these really terrible movies. And I don't know what that would have done for my career, but there's, when the times are hard like that, you simply have to say, this is what I want to do. I want to make my movie. I don't want to take the money. And you just walk forward step by step and get through it somehow. And I got through, actually only took me about 3 weeks to write that script. And I just, every day would sit down at 8 o'clock in the morning and I'd write until about 8 o'clock at night. And I just said, I'm going to finish this, as painful as it is. And I'm going to ignore these phone calls of lure of riches and get through this. After I did American Graffiti and it was successful, it was a big moment for me because I really did sit down to myself and say, okay, now I am a director. Now I know I can get a job. I know I can work in this industry and ply my trade and express my ideas on things and be creative in a way that I enjoy. Even if it's, I go down to end up doing TV commercials or something, or I fall back into what I really love is documentaries, I'll be able to do it. I can get a job somewhere. I know I can raise money somewhere. I know I can do what I want to do. And that was a very good feeling because I know at that point I'd made it. There wasn't anything in my life that was going to stop me. I had a very, very difficult time in my first two pictures. And when I started working on Star Wars, my second film, American Graffiti, had not come out yet. And so in the beginning, it wasn't something anybody was interested in. And I'd taken it to a couple of studios, and they had turned it down. And then one studio executive saw American Graffiti and loved it. And I took him the proposal. He said, I don't understand this, but I think you're a great filmmaker, and I'm going to invest in you. I'm not going to invest in this project. And that's really how it got made. American Graffiti was really my first attempt at doing something mainstream, so to speak. And even it was it was in a genre that was looked down upon, but I loved when I was a kid. It was about my life as I grew up, so I cared about it a lot. And then on top of it, it was in a style that was different from what everybody was used to. It was intercutting 4 stories that didn't relate to each other, which nobody really done before. Now it's sort of the standard fare for television. It had music all the way through it, not just score, but actual songs from the period, and that is something that nobody had done before. And they just sort of described it as a musical montage with no characters and no story. And so it's very, very hard to get that off the ground. And on top of that, it was a B movie. I almost got it set up at American International Pictures, where they liked doing those kinds of movies, but it was too strange for them in terms of the style. And Star Wars was kind of the same situation, where it was a genre they weren't that interested in. Science fiction was not something that did well at the box office. It dealt with robots and Wookiees and things that generally most people, they couldn't read it and say, I understand what this is all about. They just were completely confused by it. And really, on top of that, it was aimed at being a film for young people. And most of the studios said, look, that's Disney's. Disney does that. The rest of us can't do that. So we don't want to get in that area. So I had so many strikes against me when I did that. I was lucky that I found a studio executive that just believed in me as a filmmaker and just disregarded the material itself. I was working with a British editor, and the scenes would come back, and I'd go on the weekends and look at the scenes with the editor, and they weren't working. And I was very down about the whole situation. So I went in myself on Sundays and started recutting the movie. The editing wasn't obviously bad, but it just wasn't working, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. I mean, it was either I was doing a terrible job directing this thing or something else. And as I started to cut the film together, I realized that I was making cuts that were, a foot away from where the editor had been making them. And I'd been using the same pick takes that I'd given him, but I was just slightly moving it ever so slightly in one direction, and it suddenly clicked in and started working, which was a great relief to me, because for up to that point I was feeling very desperate about the whole situation. I made a pact with myself that I was going to make all 3 movies, and in order to do that, as I started to make my deal with 20th Century Fox, I acquired the sequel rights, because I didn't want them to bury the sequel. I wanted to make these movies, and I was determined to make these movies, regardless of whether they wanted to or the movie made any money or not. And then I got the merchandising rights, which weren't anything at the time, because there was no such thing as merchandising on movies. Some TV stuff, but not movies. Their lifespan is just too short. But I figured I could make posters, I could make T-shirts, and I could publicize the movie, and hopefully people would go see it. And because the studio, everything is sort of a struggle again to survive, which is the studio won't put enough money into your movie to get it into the theaters, to do the advertising. So I will say, well, I don't have any money, but I can maybe make a T-shirt deal, and I can maybe make a poster deal, and I can maybe get these out at science fiction conventions and things before the movie comes out, and promote the movie. So I did it as sort of self-preservation. I think for most creative people, they don't like others looking over their shoulders saying, why don't you make that green? Why don't you make that blue? Well, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I don't like that. Don't put that in there. I want to, it's sort of like Michelangelo and the Pope in terms of doing the Sistine Chapel. It's a very irritating thing, and I'm sure Michelangelo was very irritated with the Pope. And so you try to get yourself into a situation where you only have to answer to yourself, where you can ask advice of people, and sort of work with your peers and mentors and things to try to do the best job that you can possibly do. There's nothing worse than the frustration of having somebody who you feel doesn't get what you're doing, trying to turn it into something else. And it's a very, very annoying and sort of frustrating thing, and I just never wanted to go through it. I was very fortunate as I came up through the film business that I was able to insulate myself from that. Occasionally I get a studio recutting my movie at the very end, but I would always fight and get it eventually, even if years later, get it cut back. But it comes out of film school, I think, where the primacy of the creative process in terms of making a film is what you live for. It's not a business. It's trying to create something interesting that you're proud of and try out creative ideas that may seem really off the wall, may work, may not work. Success is a very difficult thing. It's much more difficult than one might think. And when I first had a successful movie, which was American Graffiti, fortunately it was huge, but it wasn't so huge in terms of monetary things, and it came so slowly that I was able to assimilate it a little bit. Star Wars was much more difficult, and I had a lot of friends who had become very successful, and they said, "Boy, watch out, boy! When that one hits, you're really going to be thrown for a loop." I said, "Oh, no, I went through American Graffiti. I can handle this. I know, you know." But when Star Wars finally, the reality of it hit, and all of the attendant things that go on around it hit, psychologically, it's a very, very difficult thing to cope with, and you really need time after an event like that in your life, especially if it comes very fast, to assimilate what it is that's happened to you, and how everybody relates to you, and how your life is. Here you spent your whole life just begging and, using every means at your disposal to get one person or two people to say yes to your project, or say yes, I'll do this, yes, and then suddenly everybody says yes. Suddenly everybody wants you to do everything and anything you want, and then you have to start learning how to say no. And tons of opportunities come your way, wonderful opportunities, and but you can't do them all. If you start doing them all, your life gets very unfocused. You get overwhelmed, and you collapse basically. Your feelings of invincibility and stuff sort of turn into a morass of depression. And I've seen it happen to a lot of people, and I went through it myself. It's unavoidable if you're successful. And no matter how much you think you can deal with it, you can't. I've discovered that most critics themselves are cinematically illiterate. They don't really know much about movies. They don't know the history. They don't know the technology. They don't know anything. So for them to try to analyze it, they're lost. But your friends usually know what they're doing, and they can critique the technical side of things to say this doesn't work. You're putting the cart before the horse. This kind of stuff. And then the rest of it is what you like. It's a personal, it's in the eye of the beholder. I like this movie. I don't like this movie. There's a lot of movies that are badly made that I love. There's a lot of movies that are just beautifully made, but I don't like them. And critics have a tendency that's all they focus on, which is I like it, I don't like it. It's good, it's bad. And it doesn't work that way. And so you really have to not deal with that part of what happens. It's the same thing with the audience. I've made some movies that have, 10 people have gone seen. Nobody wanted to go see the movie. And some films that the people who went and saw them didn't like it. Probably, there's maybe a half a dozen of us that actually like the movies. But that's fine. If I like it, then I'm happy with it. And you have to sort of accept that no matter what. If nobody else likes it, you're not going to stay in business, the business of making movies very long, because you need the resources in order to keep going. So you have to try to find a niche audience, or some kind of an audience that has the same likes, dislikes, and aesthetic sensibilities that you have. I think one of the reasons that Stephen and I have been as successful as we have is because we like the movies. We like to go to the movies, we enjoy movies, and we want to make movies like the ones we enjoy. We want to be able to entertain the audience, we want to be able to startle the audience, we want to be able to blow the audience away and have them walk out of the theater saying, "Whoa, that was fantastic. I was really moved by that." That's where part of the fun of it is. You want people to think, you want people to be emotionally moved. There's theory behind that in terms of storytelling. It's been around for thousands of years. That's where something like live theater or live performance is something that is very valuable, because you get instant feedback from your audience, and you kind of know the things that work and the things that don't work. That's the advantage that the Greek storytellers had and Shakespeare had, that us in the film industry are harder to come by, which is to be able to see an audience reaction and then adjust to what works. So you have to use your experience of sitting through a lot of movies. I don't ever see movies by myself. I always see them with other people. because I want to know what works. I want to know where they laugh. I want to know where they don't laugh. I want to know what they think about it afterwards. Because in the end, that's the art that I'm working with is trying to communicate in a way that is effective, and people react to. So I can't ignore the people I'm
technology as sometimes sometimes an end to things, and it isn't an end in certain cases. In the movie business, the movie business, I mean the act of creating in the art form of movies, the craft of movies, is completely technical. I mean, that's all it is. It's a big technical thing, as opposed to writing a book or something, which is partially technical. I mean, the writing part, using the different pens, the different papers, that was all a big deal as you went back. The first printing press, binding books, paperback books, cheap books for a lot of people. That's all technology that allows the writer to reach a better audience, and sometimes in the case of painters as opposed to writers, express themselves more clearly. A lot of painters, Michelangelo, a lot of painters in the past were very adept at mixing colors and coming up with new colors so they could express things in new ways. The technology of brushes and all those things were very important to how they applied their craft. Same thing in movies, only it's 100-fold. The first movies, they just put up a camera and had a train come into a train station, and everybody was amazed. And that was sort of all technology. Just look at the technology. But as it grew into more of an art form and much more sophisticated than that. And what we've been doing ever since then, whether we add sound or whether we add color or whether we use digital technology, is simply a way of broadening the canvas so that we have more colors to work with. As it started out, it was cave paintings, and they're very, very beautiful and very significant. But as you get along, the technology of using canvas or sculpting in different kinds of material, suddenly it all advances to a point where it gets very sophisticated, and you can tell much more interesting stories, and you can express yourself more clearly. And that's what's happening today, and that's why all artists are constantly pushing the technology of their medium to be able to widen the range that they can use their imagination. The area that has the most range at this point is probably literature, and always has, because it's the key to the mind, and it's very direct. So and there, it just depends on paper and how you manage to use your words. But theater, Shakespeare, most of Shakespeare is written around the technology of the day. And things are staged in a certain way and written in a certain way in order to deal with the limitations of the stage, of the flickering candlelight, and of the rowdy audiences, and how do you get people off the stage and get new people on the stage if you don't have a curtain, and those kinds of things. So in a lot of ways, the artist is restricted a great deal by the technology of the medium that he's working in. And in film, because the nature of it is so technological, the artist has been the most restricted in what he can do. And digital technology and the new kinds of things we're working with today that we're pushing forward allows you to tell a bigger story and use more imagination than you were able to do in the past. My life is making movies, and I like storytelling, and I've got a lot of stories that are stored up in my head that I hope to get out before my time is up. And so for me, looking at it, it's just a matter of, how can I get through all the stories in the amount of time I have left? And my dream is that I get to do it. I would like to see our society mature and become more rational and more knowledge-based, less emotion-based. I'd like to see education play a larger role in our daily lives, and have people come to a larger understanding, a bigger picture understanding of how we fit into the world and how we fit into the universe, not necessarily thinking of ourselves, but thinking of others. I guess the advantage that my generation had is when we were in film school and we were starting in the film business, the door was absolutely locked, and there was a very, very high wall, and nobody got in. Therefore, all of us beggars and scroungers down at the front gate decided that if we didn't sort of band together, we wouldn't survive, and that if one could make it, that one would help all the others make it, and we would continue to help each other. So we banded together. I mean, that's how cavemen figured it out. Any society starts that way. Any society begins by realizing that together, by helping each other, you can survive better than if you fight each other and compete with each other. If I got a job, I would help somebody else get a job. If somebody got more successful than me, it was partly my success. My success wasn't based on how I could push down everybody that was around me. My success was based on how much I could push everybody up. And eventually their success was the same way. And in the process, they pushed me up. And I pushed them up. And we kept doing that. And we still do that. And even though we all have, in essence, competing companies, we see it as if everybody succeeds, or my friend succeeds, then everybody succeeds. So and that's the key to it, is to have everybody succeed, not to gloat over somebody else's failure. One of the basic motifs of fairy tales is that you find the poor and fortunate along the side of the road. And when they beg for help, if you give it to them, you end up succeeding. If you don't give it to them, you end up being turned into a frog or something. So it's something that's been around for thousands of years, a concept that's been around for thousands of years. And it is even more necessary today when people are much more into their own aggrandizement than they are in helping other people. I mean, the one thing about you here at the Academy here is constantly about public service, about helping others. I don't think there's anybody who's become successful that doesn't understand how important it is to be part of the larger community, to help other people in the larger community, to give back to the community. And it's not something you start doing when you've made it. Now I'm on the top, I can sort of enhance my joy and self-esteem by helping the poor underlings. It's when you are at the very lowest level and you're struggling. When we were in film school and stuff, we were all very, very poor. We were all very, very struggling. We all need jobs very desperately. And if one of us couldn't get a particular job, we'd send another friend in on the interview because we were hoping that one of us would get the job. And so you do it right from the very beginning. You can start every single day. Whether it's helping your brother or sister, or helping your peers at school, or helping in the community. But it's not just a kind of public service thing. It's a way of life. If America is the pursuit of happiness, the best way to pursue happiness is to help other people, because there's nothing else that'll make you happy. You can be as rich and famous and powerful as you want to be, and it will not bring you happiness. And that's said over and over and over again. It's such a cliche that it hardly needs to be said, but people don't understand that it's actually true. And you can find people rich, powerful, and famous, and they aren't happy. And you can find people who have discovered the fact that it's really helping people. It's really being compassionate toward other human beings that makes you happy. That gives you a spiritual fulfillment and a kind of fulfillment that goes way beyond anything that you can buy. I say this is a 5,000-year-old idea, and every prophet, every intelligent, rational, successful person has said it, and it's a very, very simple idea, and the most
after a lot
important
of
part
struggling
of it.
and sort of reflection, I realized that the time you have to give is now, regardless of how old you are. And it's kind of a realization, because one, it's kind of, you mean I'm in that position already. It's sort of a way of saying, oh my gosh, I'm one of them. I'm one of those old guys that gives libraries to schools and things. And here I'm only 20 or 27. And I think I've seen, again, a lot of people go through this who are working so hard, they wake up one day and realize that those things that they say, I'll do that someday, I'll do that someday. Well, that someday is today. And if you have the means to do it, then this is the time to do it. And it's a little hard to do when you're building up your nest egg, so to speak, your security blanket, to give it away. And my feeling is you can't give the time away. You should give, part of your resources away.